what we're going to be doing today, for the conversation is we'll be talking kind of just at a macro about cyber threats. Then we'll also be talking, and we'll get a good perspective there from Rob and Sandra on that topic. And then we'll also end up talking about, look, at a senior level within agencies and companies, what should, at a C-suite level, what should folks be doing, right, to make a difference around cyber? And then we'll talk about cyber resiliency, right, and what we should be doing there. But before we get into it, let me read a little bit of Rob and Sandra's bio, and then we'll get into it. All right, so Rob has been a 30-year exec at NSA. Rob leads efforts to prevent and eradicate cyber threats to the U.S. national security systems and critical infrastructure with initial focus on the defense industrial base. He has held the most important cyber-related jobs in our government over a career of more than 30 years, including as our nation's top cyber coordinator at the White House, acting Homeland Security Advisor, and serving as the top offensive and defensive leader at the NSA. So excited to have you here today, Rob. By the way, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Tait, and I am CEO and President of ManTech. We do a lot of full spectrum cyber, and I think that's why I'm up here on this panel. But we're really here to listen to these two fine folks. So Sandra is a recognized cybersecurity leader and has been the head of global intelligence for Mandiant since 2017, which was recently acquired by Google. And Sandra is an officer in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, serving as a faculty member in the National Intelligence University, is a member of the Aspen Institute Cybersecurity Working Group, sits on the Strategic Council of the Silverado Policies Accelerator, and also a member of the Institute for Security and Technology's Ransomware Task Force Steering Committee. Okay, but that's not it for her. She actually has a whole nother line. So Sandra is pursuing her PhD at Johns Hopkins University as an Alperovitch Institute Fellow and has an MBA from MIT, as well as 4 additional master's degrees. Okay. Oh no, actually hold the applause because she also has 6 kids.
Can we stop now?
Now you can applaud. All right. So we have... I might pay for that later, but anyway, I thought that was a great intro to great speakers. So let me start with our first question, and Rob, for you. First, if there's anything you want to add from an intro, feel free.
All good.
Exactly. But from your perspective and from NSA, give us a perspective around cyber threat landscape. What are you seeing? What are you concerned about? But then also, what are your priorities in terms of handling these things?
Yeah. So thanks. If you look at the cyber environment, I mentioned yesterday that there has never been an era where there is more resources and more threat groups coming after business, government, technology, and critical infrastructure than there is today. So that ecosystem around the threats is thriving, right? But it takes kind of this community to think about what we need to do and where we need to focus. From the NSA lens, our unique contribution is trying to go out into foreign space to understand that threat, the tools, the technology, the actors, the intent, and the actual operations. And so that's where my focus is. How do we take that unique thing and get it into the ecosystem so that we can be threat informed? And now everything we're doing is trying to drive threat informed decisions, whether it's in advance to prevent the incidents or to understand where somebody's had success and we need to go and address it.
Okay. And then where do you feel, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you on this journey?
I have no idea where to put a number on that. Okay. The threat or our response?
It's ever evolving.
Yeah, it's ever evolving, right? So my angst is high just because of the impact it's having, right? You look at the scourge of ransomware, and as we start to address ransomware, the trend we're seeing is that there's actually less companies getting ransomed and more being extorted, right? Mm-hmm. They're grabbing that data because companies have gotten better at backing up and preventing the actual deployment of the ransomware, but they're still getting sensitive data out of corporations.
Right. So Sandra, same question to you, and also if you want to add anything to your intro as well, although I think I covered it pretty well. But no, I'm just kidding. But from your perspective, right? You have you see things globally as well, and would it be interested in your perspective on the cyber landscape, and then also what are your priorities? Because you have customers and clients that you're also supporting as a part of this.
That's right. And so from a Mandiant perspective, what we are looking at is all of the threats from the incident response work that we do. We're also looking at telemetry from partners that we have. We monitor adversary infrastructure in the underground and vast other places. And then we're also looking, we have 4 global security operations centers around the world. So we have pretty good visibility. Now that we're at Google, we hope to have more visibility on threats, and we're working towards that. What we're seeing right now is tremendous innovation on the part of the threat actor. They're constantly changing. Everything from new malware being written in a computer language called Rust, which we now have to hire people to understand that, so that when we're doing malware analysis, we can actually really see and have expertise in that. So we're in some ways we're kind of chasing. We're seeing whereas in a couple years ago it was very tailored malware and applications to address Linux-based targets. We're seeing now hypervisors being targeted as well, so ESXi specific efforts, meaning they're trying to tailor, trying to innovate. We've seen them test out how to use OneNote files. So it's just this constant evolution in the threat environment where threat actors are smart. They understand where our weaknesses are. They understand where we can do new things. And we are having to constantly innovate both on, from a defensive perspective, but also trying to get ahead of the threats as well.
And do you see that is accelerating in terms of the threat actors' capabilities? And and what are you thinking about in terms of how to prioritize your actions to stop that from happening?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, what we're seeing is more threats, clusters of threat activity, different types. It's in some ways, when you think about the cyber workforce as well, it's exhausting. So the cyber workforce is already suffering from a shortage. When you add to that the constant drumbeat of more threats, different types, whereas a few years ago it was we might have one incident that was major that took everybody's resources offline for a little bit, like a log4j or something like that. But we're seeing those kind of constantly now. And so I think it's a matter of we really need to stop playing the catch-up game. We need to start innovating in a way that we can then get ahead of these things.
Great. So Rob, the cyber strategy was recently released. I know in your past you've spent a significant amount of time, helping, thinking through at that kind of level for our nation, cyber strategies and how to implement that. Do you mind just sharing with the group here, a couple of key thoughts that you have about the cyber strategy that just rolled out, in relationship to how NSA is trying to support that?
Yeah. So the strategy, hopefully everyone sees themselves in the strategy. I know that the Office of the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, and his team worked really hard to go out and socialize that amongst government, but more importantly, partners in industry. A big portion of that is recognizing that the government doesn't own and operate the ecosystem where most of this is taking place. So it is trying to figure out how that relationship happens between government and industry to address the threats. And so that's a role we have in that. As I talked, the government's unique ability to see out into that space, but the data lives inside the ecosystem where the companies themselves manage and operate. And so there's got to be a place that comes together so that we can address those threats and learn from it. So a big portion of that is focused on that government to industry relation. But another key part is addressing one of the points Sandra raised, which is the workforce. We have to have people from the earliest parts of their education being educated on how to be more secure. all the way up through developing the talent that's going to come into the ecosystem to build things that by design are secure. And from there, we have the talent and the capabilities to actively secure them so that we're not in a constant cycle of addressing breaches.
No, I agree, and I think you're right. Chris has done and his team did a great job, I thought, of reaching across, a lot of different entities to kind of pull information in, and I agree. Like, I know for ManTech, we've reached down into high school years, right, to get people start their clearance process, et cetera, get them on, because you got to have that talent, as early as possible. But Sandra, I want to hear your perspective also, on the cyber strategy, right? I'm sure you had some eyes on that as well, and wanted to hear your perspective.
Well, I'll look at just one point of it with the cyber workforce, piece. There's a great effort to try and put more sort of individuals in the pipeline to address the shortages. But one piece that is really, really critical is, like, I'll call it on the supply side, maybe, where demand, depending on which side you're on. But what we have done to, nobody who would sit down and say, I'm going to design the perfect network environment, I'm going to make a completely secure company. Most people would not design what they have today. What they have today tends to be something that they have inherited, pieces that have come together over acquisition, and they're stuck with a very, a problem that they have to solve, and it will take leadership. One area of great neglect has been on that workflow of the cybersecurity worker themselves. So while we were busy defending networks, installing endpoint, putting corporate images, doing all the right things, we forgot to think about the individual defender. They're still doing things like copy paste from here to there, to use an Excel spreadsheet. They're still logging into 6 different platforms to try to do their job. If you talk to them, they love the mission and they hate their job because we haven't set it up in a way where it's, we've taken advantage of automation for them. So the cybersecurity workforce shortage, yes, is part of it is the funnel, get more, inclusive talent through the funnel. The other piece is, do we really need to hire 20 people to do this, or could we invest in automation and have 2 people do it? So I think that we have to think about the problem in a different way than just let's throw more and more people at it.
No, I think that's great, and I think we've all talked about that a little bit in terms of, how do you kind of, I'll say, move to more cognitive cyber, right, than just, I'll say, cyberspace. So, let me pivot a little bit then, topic-wise. So we kind of talked about a little bit, look at agency level, CEO, C-suite, board level, cybersecurity has moved up in terms of importance, from where it was, say, 5 and 10 years ago. And Rob, let me start with you. I mean, how should companies think about this, right? What's important from a leadership perspective to kind of make a difference here, so that we have the right posture, as for commercial and government agencies as well.
Cybersecurity is leadership's business. I think it's increasingly getting into the boardroom for discussions. It's with the CEOs and presidents. The basics of cybersecurity are often all that is needed to keep you out of the crosshairs of those incidents. And so the basics start with resourcing, attention, and priority, and getting the ability for the folks who are designing the network or maintaining the network or upgrading those vulnerable technologies. If you get it into their pipeline and give them the resources to make you secure, you stave off that downstream breach. And so that's kind of the message, certainly for the folks here who are, in the C-suite arena, is, an investment today and resourcing today in your own security prevents that breach, that loss of customer trust, the shareholder concerns on the impact of an event. That's what you need to do. You need to get ahead of the breach by doing the basics. So things like 2-factor authentication, vulnerability scanning and remediation. There are a lot of services that will just check your homework and applying those services so that you know you've done the fundamentals. That's where it starts and ends.
That's great. And Sandra, I mean, you have a lot of clients, right, kind of globally, and so what have you seen in terms of like how has this changed over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, and what would advice you give, right, to those C-suite folks and heads of agencies?
I think we've passed the era of trying to convince people that there's a problem. So that's the good news. I think people understand that there's a problem now. I think we've also seen, to borrow at something you said yesterday, that the adversary is not 10 feet tall. So Mandiant responds to over 1,000 breaches every year. And for the most part, this is a survivable incident. Most companies pick themselves back up, remediate, and press forward. And so it is all about what Rob just said, which is, do you have your ducks in a row? Do you have those basics and best practices in place? Because you will need to run a process. And that's another piece that I'd give as advice is run a tabletop, get the key players in place, including your communications and PR people. What we're seeing with ransomware now, the good news is we're seeing, a decrease in ransomware. At least from our perspective, we're seeing about a 15% decrease in ransomware, which is great news. But what we're also seeing is on the extortion piece, threat actors are actually reaching out to competitors. They're reaching out to press. They're trying to make an incident public, and they're trying to control a narrative. And we've seen that play out in quite a few places because they want to create pressure and an urgency to pay. So you could be dealing with a situation where your ransomware story or your extortion is going to become public because the threat actor is going to make it so. So when you're doing your tabletops, make sure that you have a communication plan. It's also the difference between a bad situation and a terrible situation, how you communicate to your customers, to the public about what's happening. We have seen great success with companies that are upfront, that are transparent, communicative, and talk about what they're going to do to do better, and what happened. We see a lot of success with transparency. Companies that hide it, companies that try to manipulate, to try to not do the right thing, their situation gets worse and worse, not better. So having a communication strategy ahead of time, making sure your general counsel is part of your tabletop, all of those things can make that bad situation not terrible.
So Matt, a few other things. I think we can all take a lesson learned from the Russia-Ukraine event. What do I mean by that? Ukraine has been under tremendous cyber pressure for years, long before the invasion. And so they, by necessity, had to learn from that. They got religion about backups. They got to the point where their sysadmins understood how to respond to a breach, clean up, and move on, right? They were practiced. So all the things Sandra's talking about, as in, thinking ahead so that it's not the first time you sit down and think about an event, those made them more successful. But they also did some things, on the eve of the war with the help of industry. They moved an enormous amount of their critical processes and functions out of data centers that lived in Ukraine, where they were going to be subject to the kinetic attacks, the cyber attacks, the power and comms outages of a war, and they got it up into the cloud. That brought a lot of benefits. Not only the economic portions of that, but they got a massive cybersecurity team that had a 24/7 presence and was dealing across many entities instead of just seeing the stuff that was hitting one. It gave them the ability to be protected by this community where we all are seeing things and interacting amongst ourselves and sharing and helping understand the next techniques, the next set of threats. And so those two things of being practiced and experienced and really moving into a professionally managed security environment, those were huge issues that were resolved. So, if you're a small company, you're going to have a part-time CISO, a part-time security team at best, right? And so getting into some places where things are scaled and done at scale makes a huge difference.
And I think, and from like a ManTech perspective, I know that, a couple years ago, for 9 months, every day, right, 7 a.m., we worked on, changing our infrastructure, right? And having that be, some people use zero trust. You can use whatever term you want, but there's a lot of capabilities that you need to have. But having that top down was really important because what ended up happening is, look, it wasn't perfect, right? But because we moved fast, and there were times where we might have a couple hundred people who may not have a capability that they wanted to have for a day or two. But myself, we took that as a decision of, because of the risk profile, we'd much rather have that capability to defend our networks or have the resiliency that we're talking about here, versus maybe miss out on capability for a couple of days. So that's a hard decision, though, right? When you're talking, about a company trying to work through that, right? And that takes leadership, right? So I think what both of your points are talking about here is definitely about leadership. And I wanted Sandra, excuse me, I had a follow-up for you, right? Like, so at a board level, right, do you see a different level of sophistication and understanding and engagement, right, across your client set? Because typically, if you're coming in, right, the house is a little bit on fire, right? And so I just want to get an understanding about how is that maturing from your perspective? Is it heading the right direction, or is there more that we can do?
I think that there's now greater curiosity on boards about cyber issues. Not every board has an individual that is cyber aware, let's say, but we're seeing tremendous curiosity now, and more proactive requests for education and level setting. Where should we be? How quickly should we be able to respond to these things? What are the what are the stats and metrics that we should be tracking? What makes sense? And I think that there's a steady rise in the accepting the fact that you are probably breached. You probably are. So it's how are we going to mitigate it in a way where we use best practices and all that. But I think that we're heading in the right direction. It would be because it's become such a strategic issue, though, we still would love to see more, at least, awareness about this on board. So not everybody has that, but, where we're responding to, they now have a motivation to do it.
Right. So let me then turn the page, Rob, around public-private partnerships. Right? Are those making a difference? How do you see them from your perspective?
Yeah, so they are making a huge difference. We've put a significant amount of effort into taking the things we know and using them to help defend as a group. And what has turned the corner is realizing that what we know is not nearly as sensitive as how we know it. So that makes the ability to share what we know easier. And if we go ahead and share something with industry and we find out they're already working it and aware of it, that is tremendous cover for action for us to put even more out there and reinforce. Sometimes it's the ability to take a threat and highlight that, no, this one's really important, and here's the context behind the why. That's another thing that I think the government uniquely is able to help with, because there is so much noise out there. Understanding what you've got to pay attention to first is often critical. What is the thing that is uniquely focused on your industry or your company or this level of national security? Those are all insights that we can bring. And so we've been focusing out of our Cybersecurity Collaboration Center on the defense industrial base, right? ManTech is a strong partner, as is most of the other big names you would understand from the defense business. So we'll help them withstand the attacks from these nation-state actors. But at the same time, the industry players who are helping you manage, defend, and operate your networks are also partners that then, when we interact with, they protect the ecosystem broadly. And so the thing that NSA knows about a tactic or a malicious activity becomes tradecraft that protects billions of endpoints through that partnership. And we think that really has been a revolutionary breakthrough.
Yeah. So, Sandra, anything that you see it from two ways, right? With Mandiant and Google working with NSA, but also with all your customers and clients. I mean, how do you view the public-private partnerships?
Well, I don't think it's ever been better. I think we are always, trying to find ways where we can work better together. But I mean, the reality is that we need to be able to not betray the trust that customers have put into us, no matter what country they're from or what their aim is. At the same time, we do not want to give advantages to threat actors through siloing information between us. And so this is really a constant, active, situation where we have contracts, we have privacy, we have intellectual property, all of these things that need to be protected. And at the same time, we've now found many more opportunities to say, well, this is threat actor activity. What can we do together on this? And this is so much better now than it was even a few years ago, not just with the U.S. government, but also governments around the world that are starting to embrace the idea that the team sport is the only way that we actually are going to win this. So if, for example, a company is suffering a breach from a threat actor, it only benefits the threat actor if they are not transparent. If they're not transparent about how they were breached, if they don't provide that threat information, that only benefits the threat actor. They can do it again and again and again. And so now that we have this awareness, now that we're moving in this direction, it's creativity to find the ways that we can collaborate that continue to protect what we need to protect, both from industry and from government.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that the adversaries are not in this room, right? They're overseas, and I think and NSA has 3 publicly available agreements, right, that people can sign up for. I would, and of course, this is a public service announcement, but I'm a big supporter of those agreements. I would love every company to sign up for those. Put your legal folks to the side, and put country first, right, in terms of those kinds of things. But we need to do that. We're only as strong as our weakest link. And I agree that we have made a lot of progress from a public-private partnership perspective. It has been great, but we can do so much better too, right? Which is great, which is nice, right? And that's what I love about when we talk about these kind of topics, right? We always want to strive to be the best. So let me pivot then and then by the way, we will open it up to questions for everyone. So please be ready. But in terms of we just touched on cyber resiliency. Actually, you know what? I've been asking Rob first. Sandra, this one's coming to you first. Oh. Cyber resiliency, especially from a Mandiant Google perspective, you're out there, you see a lot of different things. For the I'll say the viewers at home here today, what are the couple, 2, 3 things that you think they should be focused on from a cyber resiliency perspective?
I think some of them are really the easy ones. Let's cover first, right? So it is the best practices portion, but then it's also the more complicated ones. Things like culture, having a security culture. What does that mean? There are a lot of fundamental ways that you can design processes and technology with security in mind, and that's coming to terms with the fact that we live in a state of constant global competition, where you need to see yourself as that potential toehold, that potential entry point where a threat actor can enter into a network because your password isn't what it should be, or you didn't implement the right corporate image, or you didn't do all the things that you were supposed to do. So for resiliency, I think it's a best practices, it's a culture issue as well, and then it's that awareness. It's an awareness of what's really happening in the world. You spoke a lot about leadership, Matt, and I think that's really what this is about. It's, the organizations that have to make these pivotal changes, for some of them, it's going to be a career-ending event. If they do the pause and the slowdown to do the right thing, to make that long-term investment, it could be a career-ending event for that leader. To do the right thing. We haven't incentivized those changes very much for them. If they're a publicly traded company, their investors are not going to be excited about a slowdown in growth because they've decided to pivot to make a digital transformation, for example, unless you can convince them. So this is massively, it's a leadership issue. It's a take your sacred cows to the back and shoot them kind of issue, right? And it takes courage. And right now, probably a lack of leadership is one of the biggest ways that the adversary is winning today. Because we have all the tools, we have all the expertise, we have everything we actually need, all the elements of the recipe are there. We just have to decide to lead.
Rob, over to you from a cyber resiliency perspective.
Yeah, so I'll give a practical one, much like Sandra talked about, running a tabletop with your board and your leadership and your cybersecurity team. Think about the practical step of checking your backups, right? So first, everyone should have backups, but you don't want to find out in a crisis that your backup process didn't work and it wasn't able to restore a key aspect of your business. So thinking through that, it really, it's so much better if you try that and work out the kinks and show on an annual basis that you really are backing up and can restore from those backups. So be resilient and find that out now and not in the time of extremis.
No, I agree with that. I mean, the phrase that we use at ManTech is be brilliant at the basics, right? Because, patching, the things you're talking about, I mean, they sound like those are the things that you think everyone would do, but everyone does not do those in an equitable manner, right? So, and that makes a big difference.
Thanks for the great panel, guys. I want to connect this panel with the previous panel that we had before lunch. We had an executive at a critical materials company talking about how China is very interested in stealing their technology, coming after them. And I don't want to speak for that company, but there's lots of small businesses in our nation that are working on critical national security issues that may not have large staffs of security people, may not even have a CISO. What advice do you have for them when they have nation states like China coming after them? What can they do to protect that intellectual property?
Yeah, so I think I already went there, which is, do what the Ukrainians did. Look to the big providers. Don't try to roll your own. Don't try to have your two people work 24/7 against a nation-state adversary. Take advantage of, the amazing teams that the U.S. has in this industry and get your things provided and managed by one of the large-scale capable providers.
Sandra, anything you want to add there?
Well, I couldn't agree more. There's a current, debate about security. The Ukrainians did learn that being on-prem wasn't going to let them have the security that the cloud provided to them. It also, moving to the cloud, allowed them to get help from so many different places. So, I without sounding too self-serving, as part of a company that provides cloud services, I definitely think that's the future, and that we need to be encouraging small, medium businesses to take advantage of the fact that there are great infrastructure they can buy into that will take care of that for them.
Well, I also think, when we talk about the Ukrainian lessons learned, the way that maybe we think of cyber resiliency, what the Ukrainians have shown is a little different, right, than how we are operating. And so there's that kind of education, is needed as well in terms of an understanding. Okay. I see your hand raised over here.
Hi, Margie Murphy from Bloomberg News. On China, and I'm surprised no one's brought this up yet, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask about TikTok. And this one's for Rob. And I wondered, I've got two parts to the question. Firstly, I wondered if you could maybe talk us through some of the work that's being done on your side, or the intel that you're getting that suggests that China would act on its kind of loaded gun, and it would act on all this kind of data that it's sitting on. And secondly, as a follow-on to that, how would you prioritize TikTok as a problem in comparison to the other cybersecurity threats impacting people in the US today?
Yeah, so TikTok, and you referenced an earlier quote I've given publicly. The quote is, everyone wants the smoking gun intelligence of TikTok is being used and manipulated in a way that's dangerous when it's a loaded gun, right? It is the threat pointed at us. the focus on TikTok is a strategic issue, so it's not a tactical thing. A lot of the stuff we're talking about here is day-to-day tactical problems that we're having from a number of threat actors, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and a host of cyber criminals. I again go back to that same kind of analogy. Why would you bring the Trojan horse inside the fortress? Why would you bring that capability into the US when the Chinese could manipulate the data we see to either include the things they want to present to our population, divisive material, malign influence, or remove the things that paint them in a bad light that they would not like to be exposed to the American people. So that's a tremendous strategic capability, and providing it to the Chinese is just unwise, right? All of the talks we're doing here today about China, the threat, the challenge, the national security risk, the economic risk, and the plans and intentions they broadcast. You can read their strategies about the threats they pose, not today, not tomorrow, but they're thinking 5, 10, 20 years out. These are the types of tools that are going to give them the advantage on those time horizons. So don't provide it to them.
And in terms of it being, a priority, it's the headline everywhere at the moment. Politicians are talking about it. Is that where we should be focusing all our attention?
Again, all our intention? No, but it's a problem. We know it's a problem. Let's address it. Don't walk away from it.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you for those questions. Oh, it is just for the, I see a hand, I think, back here. It's hard to, oh, there's another one over here. Okay. I think over here you got, yeah, exactly. When you're bald, right, this reflection thing is like twice the trouble here. So.
I can barely see you guys. Oh.
All right.
Rob Joyce with Third Point Ventures, and we invest in cybersecurity companies and that do business both with the United States government and with Mandiant as MSSP, so thank you both for the business. But I had a question about offensive cybersecurity. So we've invested in a number of companies in Israel, spent a lot of time there, and they're very comfortable from a government standpoint with executing offensive efforts preemptively against bad actors in cybersecurity. That's been kind of hard to do for us and for other friendly countries that we have. I'm wondering, is anything changing in that regard, or has it changed, or is it just something you can't talk about?
So I think we can talk about, you don't talk about the specifics of operations, but if you read the national security strategy, the defense strategy, there's components in there about continuous engagement. And the Department of Defense's strategy is that we're not going to allow adversaries unimpeded chances to come at us and continuously try until they win. Right? It's the soccer analogy. You're not going to let somebody stand out there and kick an unlimited number of balls on goal until they score. You're going to want to go out and play defense. And so that defense comes in a number of different arrays. Some of that is offensive cyber. Some of it is the things the department does with the hunt forward activities with partners and allies. Some of it is work with industry, and as we team up and collaborate on threat intrusion actors, their tools, their infrastructure, that imposes the cost and adds the friction as well. And then we're increasingly using the things like diplomacy and even economic tools in that arena. So it is not one thing. Offensive cyber is a legitimate part of the strategy and something we do talk about in terms of all of the tools of national power. But increasingly, we're trying to find multiple ways to bring the pressure against the people who decide to use cyber effects. And those decision makers are often more important points to address than the actual operations or technical capabilities themselves.
I think there was a question over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nazak. I'm from the law firm of Wiley Ryan. I'm really terrified about grid resilience in the United States. And I know that from work, I know that, if you have a charging station that connects to the grid, you can also transfer malicious code into the grid. Talking to my friends who are grid specialists in the US government, I know that our adversaries have capabilities of taking down a significant portion of our energy grid system. I am stunned by the dearth of legislation that actually helps us address this. So I guess from a cyber standpoint, how grave are the risks from what I'm understanding? They're pretty significant, smart homes, et cetera, all connecting to the grid. And then what would you like to see in terms of legislation that tries to address this? Thank you.
The resilience of the grid is a huge concern, right? And I think if you look at the Department of Energy, CISA, and others, there is a lot of work on what do we need to do in terms of recognizing that the energy infrastructure of the U.S. is something that has evolved over time. And a lot of it was established before there was a significant cyber threat. And so the companies themselves, the government, the regulators are all recognizing this and trying to set a path that improves. I like the idea that, your question is, what do we do in legislation? There are other tools beyond that, right? So there are things that the companies themselves are addressing because it is not, it's not in their business interests to have their system taken down or their customers damaged or impacted. There's also a growing amount of regulatory attention because those can be enacted without legislation. And so you're seeing that across all of those steps. But I'll give Eric Goldstein fair warning that maybe that's another good question when he comes up.
And I'll just add that, unless if there was any question about whether or not this is a threat, I can tell you that threat actors have long had interest in our, critical infrastructure, including the grid. We've seen threat actors have long persistence in those types of systems. Now, just because they're there doesn't mean that they are, planning on doing something imminent. I mean, often there's, getting persistence is often a way of getting strategic optionality. So the threat obviously is there. It's not necessarily imminent, but what it does is it gives the opportunity that if a threat actor wanted to act, the persistence that they have, the interest they've already seen that they have, poses a huge risk.
Great. So I'd like, if you all could please give Rob and Sandra a very warm applause. Thank you both. That was a great panel, and looking forward to more panels today. Thank you.